All right, ladies and gentlemen, Derek Lambert, Myth Vision Podcast. We've got a treat for you today. I really am excited to introduce this guest of mine. So let's go ahead, because we're doing this live. You guys get to interact. I'm going to try and do these more often. I love doing the lives with you guys, getting your questions, your ideas. But we're going to talk about the most interesting man in the world, or at least according to Dr. Steve Mason. He is the most interesting man in the world. He's done a deep dive. He's spent decades on this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started here in just a second, and we're going to have an excellent live show. I think I'm going to do the lava today. I fought Leviathan yesterday. I'm a little tired, but I think today I'm going to defeat Lucifer in his own house. You ready? Here we go. Myth Vision. Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. You know who it is, Derek Lambert. I'm so excited to talk to you guys about this show today. Josephus has been this strange, lingering historical figure who has like the hinge pin on so many ideas. It's like mythicists run to him, historicists run to him. Everybody looks to this guy to try and figure out stuff. What is he saying? Who was this mysterious guy? How important was he? Well, I have an expert on the topic of Josephus, on histories of Josephus, surrounding the first century, knowing about this guy who's going to join us today. And so I wanted to bring it live, baby. I wanted to bring it live. With that being said, let's go ahead and introduce our guest here. I have Dr. or Professor Steve Mason. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and kick us off here real quick here. Professor Steve Mason, sorry, not Stephen, your middle initials N. So
my mom, my late mother called me Stephen when I was in trouble, but she's about the only one who ever did. So when I hear it, that's the reaction. I loved my mother, but I hope I'm not in trouble. Yeah.
Well, let's hope not. Mom, I'm the same way. When I hear mom say Derek, it's like she said my name. Oh, no. Well, we're saying Josephus. So Josephus is going to be on the hot seat today. I'm excited to hear what you bring. And this is kind of a wing it show on the history, who this guy was. And we're going to take the audience's questions. But first, just so you know a little bit about Dr. Mason here, and I'm going to try and call you Steve. I told you I'll try. It's hard for me to not try to go with a professional. So please don't take that as disrespectful.
No, Steve is good. Yeah.
So you were a Canadian historian of Judea in the Greco-Roman period, best known for your studies of Josephus and early Christian writings. He was professor of classics, history, and religious studies at York University in Toronto. He has been Kirby Lang Chair of New Testament Exegesis at Aberdeen University, and he did work at the University, and I'm going to try this, of Groningen?
Yeah, it's good enough. Yeah,
Holland. So you've got quite a bit of credentials, and you have written extensively on this subject matter. So for anybody who's interested, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen real quick. It's down in the description. Click my suggested books by Myth Vision down in the description. It's an affiliate link, so it gives me a kickback if people want to buy the books through there. I'm pretty open about that, of course. Give me some gas money, you know what I mean? So here is some of his writings: A History of the Jewish War, AD 66 to 74, Key Conflicts of Classical Antiquity, Josephus, Judea and Christian Origins, Methods and Categories, Josephus and the New Testament, Flavius Josephus, Life of Josephus, Orientation to the History of Roman Judea. And then I slid down here and found more. I was like, holy moly, you've written a lot. Early Christian Reader, Flavius Josephus. I think this is another version of what was above.
No, it isn't. It isn't actually.
Oh, it isn't?
No.
Interesting.
If you want, I'll tell you a little bit about it, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to let everybody know if they're interested in knowing the subject, please go down in the description, check it out. I'm super excited about the show, by the way. If you will, tell us about it. I've got a super chat already, though. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, I see it. It's the single most common question that I'm asked.
Well, you mentioned in the I guess you said the description of what your book is about in one of them, and you mentioned very clearly these two words. Josephus, one word. Josephus was an apologist. So you gotta kind of take that and realize there's a grain of salt there you need to put on it before you actually examine what he's saying. So
well, we can talk about that. Yeah.
I don't know where to begin with this guy. He's just there's a lot to be said.
Well, there's his life and his writings, right? Those are the two main things. So if you want me to shoot off on his life a little bit and why I would nominate him for the world's most interesting man, then I can do that. And maybe a little bit about his writings and what's in his writings, how much there is, and so on. I follow your lead, Derek.
Yeah, who's Josephus?
Okay, well, he's born in 37 CE, so the year that Gaius Caligula became the notorious Gaius Caligula, this young emperor who was reportedly kind of a beast to everybody, and he was assassinated a few years later, Gaius Caligula. So he came to power in 37. That was the year Josephus was born. So he mentions that. He said, I was born in the year that Gaius Caligula became emperor. And then he lived until about 100 or a little bit later. He lived till at least the end of the 1st century. We don't know exactly when he died because he didn't tell us, either in advance or in retrospect. So, but the great thing about that is, and what makes him so important as a writer, is that he's a contemporary of the New Testament writers, right? So that he's born just a little bit after Jesus dies, around 30, around the time that Paul becomes a Christian, around 35. That's when Josephus is born. He lives his life entirely through that period, born and raised in Jerusalem, right? And then he spends the latter half of his life in Rome, and he writes his works in Rome in the Greek language to a Roman audience, even though he was brought up in Jerusalem, speaking Hebrew and Aramaic, and he knows the countryside of Galilee, where Jesus operated, the Jordan River Valley, the Dead Sea, Jericho, all these sites that come up in the New Testament. Josephus is the man who talks about all this stuff. So whenever you read in a book, the New Testament mentions Pontius Pilate, the governor who killed Jesus. You want to know about Pilate? Here's what we know about him. When people say we know about him, or the high priest Caiaphas, or somebody like that, or the Pharisees and the Sadducees, or the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, or the geography of the area, or anything like that, they're almost certainly getting it from Josephus. So you mentioned he's kind of a linchpin. That's exactly right. He's even a foundation, for pretty much everything we know. I have multi-volume books behind me that are like, histories of the period. Almost all of them depend 90%, 80% on the writings of Josephus. The rest is from archaeology. But even there, Josephus is the guy who tells archaeologists where to dig, because he names sites and describes them. So how do archaeologists know when they found a place? Well, they match up what they find in the ground with his description and say, this is it. This must be the place he's talking about. So he's like really super important as a writer, but his life is also incredibly interesting.
Was he born by anyone? I mean, who were his parents? Were they just kind of nobodies, or were they someone that had enough money to put him through education? I mean,
Yeah, thank you. So he's a priest, and in Jerusalem, that means that he is part of the aristocracy, part of the wealthy elite group of Jerusalem, right? So his parents, have a lot of money. We never really learn about, in the ancient world, men generally didn't they didn't mention the names of their wives, daughters, and so on. Women were very much in the background and usually just took the name of their father in the feminine form. That was it. That's the only name they had. So he doesn't tell us much about his mother, except he says she was trapped in Jerusalem when the war broke out. But his father's the key person, and he was apparently a priest of some note. He had lots of wealthy friends in Jerusalem. So Josephus gets an excellent education, learning not only Hebrew and Aramaic and the Bible, but also Greek language, which was the kind of language everybody used in the Near East. And he learned something of Greek literature, history, philosophy. So by the time that he is in his mid-20s already, he is being sent by the Jerusalem leaders on a trip to Rome, right? Far away. I mean, several weeks travel by sailing ship. The ship is shipwrecked en route, right? Josephus claims, we don't know how he learned to swim because Jerusalem is landlocked. Maybe he went down to the local, the pool every week for a workout or something. But
to get a healing from the angels, you know what I mean?
Maybe. He claims that he was one of the few survivors of the shipwreck, that he was able to swim all night long to get to land and survive. So,
what do you think of that?
Anyway.
I mean, just to ask you on that, and I don't want to sidetrack you, but do you think that's a little fictional there, or do you think there's some validity to that?
Well, the shipwreck story itself is not a problem. Swimming all night, that's less plausible. I mean, historians generally doubt everything, right? That's a first principle of history is, okay, we have these accounts, right? We don't just believe them. We hold them over here, as okay, that's what they say. But you don't just believe stuff. So we don't need to either believe it or disbelieve it. We just hold it over there and say, we don't know. But that's his account. And then he survived. Shipwreck was really common in the ancient world, so there's no reason to doubt that he was shipwrecked. The Apostle Paul, in one of his letters, says he was shipwrecked 3 times, even before the one that we know about from the book of Acts, which is described in detail. But that happened later. But already when he's writing this letter, 2 Corinthians, he says, I was shipwrecked 3 times. So unless he was incredibly unlucky, that was a pretty common experience.
I want to say for everybody who's watching this real quick, you have studied this for a very long time on Josephus, and you don't just know his writings. So you're going to paint a picture, I think, as we continue to learn from you, of surrounding literature and how Josephus plays a role in all of this. And if you guys aren't aware who Dr. Steve Mason is, I ask you to go check out my very good friend Tim's channel, Harmonic Atheist. I actually need to put that down in the description of previous interviews he's done. Go subscribe to my friend, please. I am going to be interviewing him on this channel as well. We're going to be discussing this. He's a big fan of Myth Vision, and of course, big fan of yours. This is why he had you on. But I want to give my friend credit because he's the one who introduced me into contacting you. And so I really, really appreciate that. And I want to continue with this. Guys, if you have questions, love to see a super chat because those come first, but I will try to get to your questions as we go. And I don't want to interrupt Dr. Mason from continuing on his thought unless there's a super chat question. That'll be more important to kind of jolt in and get interaction from the audience. But hit that like button too, guys. Hit that like button. So, okay, continue, please. I'm sorry. I hope you know where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. So he accomplished his mission. The reason he went to Rome was that several of his friends, 3 guys, had been picked up in Judea and taken to Rome as prisoners. And so he was sent on a diplomatic mission at age 25, 26, to see if he could actually free them. So he must already have had, you asked about his background. Were his parents wealthy? Were they, could they give him a good education? He must have had something pretty special going for him to be sent by the kind of elders of Jerusalem on such a touchy diplomatic mission, clearly having to speak Greek. because everybody in Rome, all the elites in Rome can also speak Greek, although Latin is their main language. So he's communicating with them in Greek, and he succeeds in getting his 3 friends released, actually. And then he goes back to Judea. When he gets back to Jerusalem, he finds that there's unrest all around him and the beginnings of the war against Rome. And this really, really concerns him, obviously, because he's just been to Rome and he knows what the Romans are about and, you know, how much power they have. And so he thinks it's like really super unwise to be, to be fomenting revolt against the Romans. I'm going to stop there for a second, Derek, and jump ahead to this one issue because I think this is the biggest knock against Josephus always. One of your questioners asked, was he full of it? Well, along with that question goes a reputation for being a turncoat, for being a traitor to the Jewish people in time of war. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to go straight after that question.
Please.
Okay. I don't believe it. And the reason that I don't is that the reason that he gets tarred with this is that his writings have survived. So he's like this most important writer who tells about his own surrender. And then the great irony is that we read that and say, hey, this guy's a rotten traitor. But now think about it for a minute. Obviously, when he told the story of his surrender, he was not telling it in order for people to say, you are a scumbag. He was telling the story actually in order to attract admiration. How can that be? Well, because if you look at this story, it's just a quick kind of thumbnail sketch is like this. Vespasian, the Roman commander, arrives in Galilee, the north of Judea, with 3 legions and all the auxiliary forces, numbering about 30,000 professional soldiers coming into Judea, into Galilee. Josephus has been sent up there to kind of see what's going on by the Jerusalem authorities. And the men he's got with him disappear, right? They vanish instantly before they see any Romans. Just when they know the Romans are coming near, they just are gone. So Josephus says, well, I'm out of here too. And he goes to a place called Tiberias. Some of your viewers may have visited Israel. Tiberias, beautiful resort town on the lake, what the New Testament calls the Sea of Galilee. So it's just a really nice lake with all these resort towns around it. And that's where he goes. He's sipping coffee, you know, in the cafe in Tiberias, when he realizes, he gets word that a little town in Galilee called Yodaphat in Hebrew or Yotapata in Greek is under threat from the Romans, that they're going to be rolling over this town soon. He has friends there. So what does he do? He, instead of finishing his coffee, he goes straight to Yotapata. Now, who else in the entire war does anything remotely like that? Nobody that we know about. Everybody else fled the oncoming Romans. They fled toward Jerusalem, which has nice thick walls and many layers of walls. And they held out there for several years. Even the guys from Galilee, they all fled south to Jerusalem as soon as the Romans appeared. Josephus is the guy who actually puts himself in harm's way, probably hoping, because he's an aristocrat, because he'd been to Rome before and talked with Romans, thought he could speak their language, maybe try to save the town. That's where he's arrested. That's where he's taken captive. So he goes there.
I just wanted to mention on the news recently, there's a guy, the shooter that was out there, like literally shooting mainly Asians in America. I don't know if you heard about that. One of the guy's wives was in a different room at this, I think it was like a massage parlor or like something like that.
Okay. Shooting
breaks out. And what does he do? He runs, leaving his wife. His wife got killed. Now, I'm not trying to say he's a coward. I think most people's instinct would be run. But it takes a real courageous person to go, I'm going after the gunman. I'm going straight for battle. I'm going to do whatever I can to try and save or protect. That's pretty interesting. So
and this is not what people remember Josephus for. In fact, hardly anybody ever mentions it. But if you think about it and you think about the situation there, I mean, this takes some kind of guts, right? He comes from a place of safety that is not on Vespasian's route. It's not on his itinerary, right? Because this is by the lake. It's not, Vespasian brought this Roman army to deal with Jerusalem. There were problems in Jerusalem in the south. So he was coming via Galilee, stopping at the main points in Galilee, and then heading south. He wasn't even going to go to Tiberias. That's a town that belongs to a Judean king, Agrippa II. So it wasn't even on Vespasian's itinerary. Josephus was safe there. And he leaves there and goes into central Galilee, where all the soldiers are, where the siege of Jotapata is beginning, and he goes inside. Now he's trapped, and he tries to organize the defense. Once he sees the Romans are not going to be put off, he tries to organize a defense. It doesn't work, of course. The town surrenders. It's overrun after about 5 weeks. It is overrun, and he is taken prisoner. Now, the reason for the bad reputation is that all of his comrades, he says, committed suicide at that time, rather than be taken prisoner. Now, the rub seems to be, well, he should have killed himself. I guess that's the criticism. He didn't, take a sword to or a knife to himself.
He's not so courageous that he didn't just kill himself.
For no reason, right? I mean, what's the point? So he survived to tell us the story. Now, if he'd killed himself, we wouldn't even know about Josephus, of course. We wouldn't know anything about it, and he wouldn't have a bad reputation. But the point is, what I always kind of laugh at is that his reputation comes from the fact that he didn't kill himself, and then he survived to become the writer. But what does he write about? When he gets to Rome eventually, because he's taken by Vespasian's son Titus, the guy who destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70, he is used as a translator, an interpreter all the time while he's in captivity. And then he's taken to Rome and given his freedom. And I think the criticism of him is supposed to be, well, he did too well. He prospered when Jerusalem was destroyed. Well, okay, but, I think it's pretty easy to see that he didn't have all that much choice. He was already a prisoner of the Romans. And the main thing is what he decided to write about when he got to Rome, and he wrote 30 volumes of Greek texts. All of them are about not the greatness of the Romans at all, not at all, but about the greatness of Judea and Jerusalem and the law of the Jews, how it's the most magnificent, constitution that was ever given to humanity. So he's a very, very proud Judean, Jerusalemite, and he wants to correct. So the first book he writes is a 7-volume study of the war, and he wants to correct all the slander against the Jews in Rome. So as you can imagine, like in the US, after, bin Laden is killed, or the time of the Iraqi invasion of Iraq in 2003, there's a lot of kind of slander, jingoism about, what are we going to do to the Iraqis, that kind of thing. Well, that's the sort of thing that was in the air after the fall of Jerusalem, right? The Jews are these negligible, miserable, no good fighters, scum who dared to fight us, terrorists and all of that. Josephus has, again, I think, the courage to be writing in Rome to say, actually, no, I'm a Judean. I'm a very proud member of the Judean people. You've got us all wrong. We are actually tough. We are more contemptuous of death. That is, we don't care if we get killed even. Like, that's how hardcore we are, right? We just fight to the death. You Romans, not so much. Like the legionaries, you're fine when you're in a column and you all stick together with your buddies, you're okay. You fight very well, very convincingly. But I tell you, and he relates various stories about when individual Judeans actually scared off Roman legionaries who were famous for being, the big tough guys. So this is what he's about. I mean, I think the war already is presenting a completely different picture of the Judeans, right? And then in the Antiquities, he writes 20 volumes devoted to the laws of the Jews and their culture and how great it is. And then he ends with a 2-volume essay on the great antiquity, the great age of the Jews, and how their laws have stood the test of time. So, in short, I don't think that reputation he has for being a coward or being somehow defective in his character. I don't know the guy. I don't know what his character was like, but I don't think that reputation has any foundation at all.
My friend here, Anthony Golden, he's also a patron. I appreciate you being a patron, brother. He actually wanted to phrase it because he's a guy who super chat us before. He says, my question though was about the veracity of his writings. Are they true or are they exaggerations? Not whether he was a turncoat. So I'm glad you answered that because I suspect you got a lot of that. I've actually spoken to many Jews I'm in contact with often. They do have a negative perception of him, especially if he's going to be writing for the guys who just destroyed the temple. So I guess it just depends on the person you're speaking to. But I've heard of exaggerations like, I wonder how accurate you can take, like Jesus ben Ananias, his final words when the catapults launched, like it almost sounds like he added flavor to the narratives. Is he enhancing it theologically? Is there an agenda? Is there something? How much, like the way we look at things and go, what really happened? How much of a grain of salt do we have to pour on his writings to try and say this is what really did actually happen? If that makes sense.
Well, thank you, and thank you to Anthony for the question. This is when I said before, this is the question I'm most often asked. That's the one. It's about the reliability of his writings, not about the turncoat thing. That's his reputation. I just wanted, in talking about his life story, I wanted to go straight for that issue to kind of clear the air. Now we can talk about, indeed, the accuracy, reliability, trustworthiness of his writings. Now, but the thing is, how much time you got here? You got a bit of...
I've got time. Dr. Mason, for you, I've got time.
If you got a few minutes, I need to... The problem is this. I could answer the question by, saying, I don't know, 73% trustworthy, right, or 69% trustworthy, or 24%. You're
probably going to need to paint all antiquity.
Well, no, I won't take like hours, but but there's a central point that I need to try to convey, and it's about how historians work, actually. So I'll try to just draw a contrast, right, if I can, very, very simply and clearly. I think most of us, when we went to school, we had to take a course called history, right? And in that course, we basically got the idea that there are things called history books that have the whole plan, the whole thing, the whole record out there somewhere. And then it's only a question of whether some texts are reliable and others not reliable, right? So, but there's this idea it's all out there somewhere. And so doing history is a matter of cobbling together reliable sources. There are even programs on some TV channels, called things like reliable sources. Well, I have to say, this may come as a shock, but for a historian, and this has been the case for like a century and a half, it's not new, historians just don't think that way. They don't work that way. They're not looking for reliable sources. In the same way, I would say that a detective investigator of a crime is not looking for that one true witness, right? There's a big famous trial going on right now that you can see on TV. If you look at the way the investigation, the way the back and forth goes, it's not a question of, okay, we finally got the one true witness here, the one who's just telling us the truth. No, what you realize is that everybody, no matter how sincere, can only tell an account from their perspective, right? So this is the job of a historian, is first of all to understand where each source is coming from, what's their angle, what's their perspective, what story are they trying to tell, right? But none of it is reliable, right, for a historian. And this isn't just Josephus, it's all the famous guys from antiquity like Herodotus, Thucydides, Polybius, Livy, Tacitus, all of these other writers. Those are some of the most famous ones. Historians realized long ago, you can't just take any of these accounts and say, okay, that's what happened. Unless somebody can show me it didn't happen, I'm going to believe that because I think this is a reliable author. So coming back to Anthony's question, I haven't forgotten about it by any means. What I'm trying to say is that at least I, as a historian, and I think most historians, don't look for reliable texts. So the category is not a meaningful category for us. And I know it comes as a surprise because we've all been conditioned to look for reliable sources, and therefore we want to say, well, this person is not reliable, and that person is. But I mean, Tacitus is viewed as a very good historian. He makes all kinds of mistakes, and he has a big agenda. But so does every single person who writes anything, right? That everybody has some, they wouldn't write otherwise if they didn't have a reason, if they weren't trying to put across something. So here's the trick, is that when events happen in real life, right? Now I have to ask your viewers to be a little bit abstract with me for a moment.
Okay.
If you see a car accident outside your window, right? What really happened? Well, you know, there's the different drivers involved, and they'll tell you their stories, and then other witnesses and any passengers in the cars. But none of those is simply reliable, right? You don't just take one of them and say, okay, that's what happened. You try to come up with what the detectives would call and prosecutors call a theory of the case, right? Which is not equivalent to any of those stories. It's something that you construct as an investigator to explain them. So in the case of Josephus, I am going to try to answer the question a little better now against that background. I think that he's very sincere as a writer, but we have to remember that in the ancient world, or we have to know if we didn't know already, that in the ancient world, writing history was not a matter of like footnoting everything and verifying facts. It was much more a moral undertaking. So the reason he wrote history was to persuade people of some moral principles. And we can see this clearly in any number of historians, good historians, like Polybius or Livy. Livy says at the beginning of, he's a great Roman historian. He begins his account by saying, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, it's been a terrible decline since the good old days. So I'm going to tell you about the good old days. Well, okay, where does he get his material from? He wasn't there. So he does his best. He puts together his accounts, but they're all shaped to make his points, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the same with Josephus. So when he writes the war, he's not like a video camera. He's not just like a feed of data coming through him. He's not like a cipher, that data passes through. He's an intelligent human being, and he shapes his work with a beginning and a middle and an end, and he puts in various themes that he wants to drive home all the way through, like some of them I mentioned before: the toughness of the Judeans, the holiness of the temple, the rottenness of the people who violated the temple, the bloodshed in the temple. These are some of his themes. And so if you study his language, he reworks different phrases that come up again and again in his work. But that's true of any good ancient historian. So they're writing in order to drive home these moral points using the past to do that. They are not just saying, I'm going to tell you everything that happened, on this day, And I know that because I made an investigation. I took a team of, forensic investigators, and we got samples and evidence. No, none of that.
It's like, it's almost like, and I want to say thank you for the super chat, Dion Yusin. I can't even say your name. You told me yesterday to try and say it. I can't. I appreciate the super chat. Oh, this is live. Yes, this is live. Look, you're getting like actual live here. So this is really cool. But it's almost like we expect, it's like fast food environment. We want our food done now. We want it done our way. We want it done, to our perfection. Yeah. And the way we expect to be reading Josephus, I think our expectations are only going to get let down the more we perceive what he should have wrote and what we should be expecting from him. The guy was theologically driven. He was a very religious Jew. He believed, and he's writing like with that, I guess the word I'll use is agenda, but it's not like a bad thing. It's just that's what but the Romans did the same thing. It's like,
everybody did.
Yeah. So I think that we do take, we should take things with a grain of salt. At the same time, you're saying there are kernels to reality that are in this for sure. It's not like it's all total fiction, as someone might try to paint.
Well, maybe I can put it this way. I mean, what he celebrates, I think rightly in his introduction, is he says, look, you all are telling rotten stories about us, Judeans, over there, how terrible we were. You humiliate us. You belittle us. You probably make us, because what the Romans usually did was they presented their enemies as like women, like men, as though they were really, no good fighters. They're really just like women. We know this, like Romans were big on this. So were the Parthians. So were all the other ancients. They made their opponents out to be women. Josephus is, not there's anything wrong with that, of course, except in that ancient environment, that's not what men wanted to look like. So Josephus is saying, I'm going to tell you a different story, and here's why you should trust my story. So here's what he says about why he's reliable. I was there. You weren't, number one. And I saw both sides of the story because I was on the Judean side fighting against the Romans. So I know that side perfectly well. I know exactly what was going on inside the Judeans' minds. And after I was taken prisoner, I was with the Romans all the time. So I heard everything that was going on in the Roman camp, and they had me translating, and they forced me to tell them stuff, geographical information. So I know both sides of the story. So those two things make me much more credible than all these scribblers in Rome who are simply retelling tales that they heard, hearsay, gossip that they heard, and they weren't even there. They don't even have an idea of what Judea looks like. They don't have any idea of the landscape, nothing at all. I know everything about the situation. You can trust me. And he basically says in the introduction, trust me. I'm your guide. And people believed him. So his works became the kind of go-to, trustworthy narrative of Roman Judea. But the point I'm trying to make is we can accept that. I mean, it makes sense, right? He did know both sides, and he was there. But that doesn't mean that he had no art in telling the story, or that he had no purpose, or that he had no themes or structure or shape that he gave his narrative, right? Which means that you can't just say it's reliable or not reliable. It's a story. But he knows what he's talking about. Yeah? Do you see what I mean, Derek?
Yeah. That's I really enjoy this. And something in my head connected on, his name is Josephus. And so it reminds me of the story of Joseph. Yeah. And being a religious Jew and being someone of importance, I wonder if there might have been somewhat of a messianic type complex on him in a way, not in the sense that he was Messiah, because obviously he's the dreamer who's saying Vespasian is the new king. It reminds me of the Joseph narrative. So when I look at Josephus, Joseph, in the first century here, I'm thinking to myself, here's a guy who's captured and imprisoned Joseph is captured and imprisoned, even though the Midianites and the Ishmaelites, there's so many contentions in the documentary hypothesis when you get into that stuff. I love this stuff, though. But he gets captured. He gets taken to Egypt. He's a prisoner. He rises to fame in Potiphar's house. He rises to fame in the Roman emperor's house. There's so much in common that I see why a lot of people they're like, okay, I'm looking for the literary. I'm looking for the story.
Yeah.
They don't buy historical, but what you're suggesting is that sometimes they are merged. It's like there might be some theology into the reality of actual history. And he has this Judeo background in his religious text that I wonder how much influence it does bring. Like he's a religious Jew. So is this guy painting a story and writing history? What is going on here?
Well, yeah, he sees himself as a kind of new Joseph, and that's, as you said, that's his name, in fact. And he draws parallels between himself and Joseph, the biblical Joseph. So you're exactly right. If I can, I'm going to push back a little bit.
Push me.
Try to knock down three categories here: religious, theological, and messianic.
Okay.
I think in all three cases, I would say three strikes, and not you, but one is out here. Because I think we misunderstand Josephus if we plug him into the categories of religion, theology, and messianism. So, for example, people go looking for Messiah types, and they find characters in Josephus' story that they apply the name Messiah to. So Josephus talks about all these messiahs. No, he doesn't at all. He's not interested in the term. He doesn't really use it, except that when he says about Jesus that he was in the James story, he was the so-called Messiah, and that doubtful passage maybe we can talk about sometime, his passage on Jesus. Those are the only times he uses that as a name. And
do you get
it's
tired of those questions, though? Someone asked that earlier. Do you get tired of the same Jesus question about the testimonium and the?
No, I don't. I don't get tired of it, but it does take some time and patience to unravel. And as you said, we want a quick fix all the time. We just want like the fast food. Give me the hot dog here. Like what's the hot dog answer? So I can just digest or not digest it, as the case may be with a hot dog. But actually, it just takes a bit of time to think about the background and the context of these things. So religion, very quickly, that's not a category in the ancient world. That's a Christian category, and then a modern Western category that we have imposed on Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on. We've put them in these kind of suitcases to make them manageable to us, right? So we think of the world in terms of religions. But in the ancient world, it just wasn't a thing. There was no word for religion. So Josephus's models are not religious historians. They're just historians. People like Polybius, Thucydides, Dionysius of Halicarnassus. These are people that he looks to as models and he kind of imitates. But these are political writers. Most historians in the ancient world are writing about political themes, like war and peace and civil strife within a polis, a city, that kind of thing. That's what Josephus is writing about. Theology, too. No, I think just ideas. He has ideas, but I wouldn't want to call them theology. They're just ideas. But in the ancient world, everybody, Tacitus, Cicero, the great orator and politician, they're talking about this stuff all the time, about the gods. Do they exist? Do they interfere with our lives? Yeah, but it's not really theology. It's not in the Christian sense of theology. Right. It's a much more general view of the world. And then messiahs, I just don't think that's on the table for Josephus. He doesn't seem to be interested in messiahs. That's not part of his worldview.
He's probably using the term like just an anointed person that his God may have put in favor. Not like we view Jesus, or like they viewed these apocalyptic leaders that were going to lead them out into Jordan and split the river, or Question from Pet Mark real quick. Anytime you see these colors pop on the screen, these are super chats, so I always appreciate and value those, and want to make sure I get those questions. So And I wanted to mention this to the audience too. I want to bring Dr. Mason on again and again and again. And thank you, Timothy Mills. I appreciate it. Tim Mills, Harmonic Atheist, for making this connection happen. But I want to talk about the Flavius Josephus testimonium on a different program, because that's going to take you probably quite a while to really build your case. And today it's like, let's get our feet wet on Josephus. Let's know who the guy is. Let's get familiar with the surroundings and what he's writing, why, and all that stuff. So Pet Mark, thank you for the 5 on the super. I don't know. Someone tried to correct me on what this little symbol means, but anyway, is there a manipulation in War of the Jews when Josephus tells the assault of Masada 2 times?
Well, I'm just trying to think of what that means 2 times. He has basically one main story about the fall of Masada in Book 7 of the War. He has 2 speeches that they're very entertaining, actually. But they help to answer this question about reliability. So we could talk a little bit about that if you want. But I'm trying to think of what the 2 times might be that Pet is referring to.
I can ask them to just get a reference. If you could find the references for the 2 times, that would help, if you don't mind. If you can't, that's okay. I'll get them to him after, and he'll have a response for whenever we do this again. I'd love to do this again, of course.
I know this story pretty well, so I can tell you there's one time that that Masada is taken by the Romans with Flavius Silva in Book 7 of the War. But it may be that Pet is referring to Book 4 of the War, when the Judeans first seize Masada from the garrison that is there. So it's a reverse thing. It's not the Romans chasing out the Jews. It's the Jews seizing Masada. So Masada, if anybody doesn't know, it's a most incredible sight. It's out in the desert, and it's like this butte or flat top kind of hill. It's almost diamond shaped, or like a lozenge shape on the surface. And King Herod, well, before him already, the Hasmoneans, had developed it into a remote fortress. And the idea was, in my view, that it's not a place you fight from. It's not a fighting fortress. It's the opposite. It's a place you flee to if you want to get away from trouble. And because when you're up there on the summit, you can see in every direction for miles around you. And that's the idea. So Herod would be up there with a garrison of soldiers protecting him, but it's not somewhere you can actually fight from. So what happens at the end of the war is that, or actually when the war is just getting underway, is a bunch of Judeans from Jerusalem go and capture this site from the small military garrison that was there, because it was a Roman fortress during the 1st century. And so somehow, we don't know how, they managed to actually kill the garrison that was guarding it. Maybe there were only 8 guys there, but even still, it's quite an achievement for irregular people. Maybe they snuck up at night, cut their throats, who knows. But they took over the site, and then their families. So this is a place you take your children, your wives, to be safe in. And we have archaeological evidence of the site that there were families living there. There were places like there were all kinds of domestic. There were makeup kits. There were like sewing and cloth work. There was a lot of ovens for cooking and for baking, stoves and ovens. There were family type installations there. So they held out until the end. And it now looks like it was the year 74 when the governor at the time, named Flavius Silva, brought a legion down to the site and said, okay, it's time for us to take this fortress back. And then there's the famous story of the people inside, not exactly committing suicide, but killing each other in a kind of murder-suicide pact, and that only a few of them, 2 adults and 5 children, survived at the end to tell the story of what had happened. Anyway, so that's basically it. What's really there's several bits of the story that are much criticized and doubted. One is that everybody killed themselves. Justifiably doubted, I think. But what you have to ask yourself is, the Roman commander, Flavius Silva, was back in Rome and climbing the political ladder when Josephus was writing his war in Rome and presenting it to Roman audiences. Now, that puts a certain constraint on what Josephus could say, because this is a very powerful man with powerful friends in the imperial family. So you can't be taking away his glory, right? So think about this, like if he went storming in there and killed everybody, he would view that as a military victory, right? He would want that to be on his, they didn't put medals on their chest, but the equivalent. He would want, the Masada campaign to be on his chest. So whatever explanation you come up with as an alternative, I mean, we're all free to doubt, but you have to think about what might have happened that would allow Josephus to tell this story in Rome and Flavius Silva be okay with it and say, yeah, okay, I'll accept that story. So this is the kind of thing a historian has to think about. It's easy to say, well, I don't believe that happened, but then you still have to think about, okay, but how do you explain what's in the story, right? You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting, because that takes you back to real life. Like, what would it really have been like? This isn't just, I don't know. We don't think of all the mechanisms involved into real life when you go back into those times. Stephen Sorensen, thank you for the super chat earlier, brother. He's never sent a super chat. He said, can you please ask him about Leone's work on textual transmission, also Nice and Schreckenberg?
Yeah, Nice and Schreckenberg, yeah. Yeah, wow, this is a very knowledgeable correspondent here, Stephen Sorensen. Thank you, Stephen. Tommaso Leone is my student, was my student at York in Toronto. Did his PhD, did a brilliant dissertation on the Arch of Titus, not the famous one that's still standing or has been repaired and restored, but the lost one in the Circus Maximus in Rome. And Tommaso Leone wrote this brilliant dissertation on that. But he's published along the way, when he worked with my project at the time, he published a couple of articles on the textual transmission of Josephus. What do I think of it? I think it's brilliant. I think that Tommaso is a very gifted scholar. Just his footnotes alone are treasures. He has these massive footnotes. Every statement he makes has an enormous footnote. He really is a master of his subject when he writes. So I think very highly of him. Niza, I'll be quick about this. I'm not sure that all your viewers really want to know about these guys, but Benedictus Niza is the one who prepared the Greek text that we generally use for translation purposes. So I direct a project now. Can I show you those? Can you see those red books? Those tall?
Yes, sir.
Those are the translation and commentary to Josephus. You showed one of them in your introduction, Derek. These are very different from everything else. They're a new translation of Josephus's works with a very detailed commentary. So I spent my morning today working on a passage of commentary and translation in this thing. So Niza, this guy Niza, provided back in the 1880s and 90s, he published the Greek text that we all still use. This guy was a stone genius in just reading all that he went around, got hold of all these manuscripts and compared them, and where there were differences, which there are all over the place, he cobbled together a single Greek manuscript, and then in the footnotes, in the apparatus, told us what the main variants were. So his text is like gold, but it's the Greek text. So to answer Stephen's question, yeah, fantastic stuff. And it's not been paralleled since. Nobody's had the time to sacrifice their entire career to doing what Niza did, even though it needs redoing now.
Interesting.
So Schreckenberg is also in the same vein. He's also passed away now, like Niza passed away a long time ago. Schreckenberg much more recently. And he was a great scholar in Münster, Germany. And he did all these works on the reception. In fact, they are exactly behind me up there. They are on the reception history of Josephus. So he traces through the Middle Ages how Josephus' works were used and reused. Now, he made some mistakes. He also has a terrific bibliography, annotated bibliography of Josephus. Now, other scholars pointed out some errors that he made, but, the guy's opus, his oeuvre, his, body of work was so massive and so important that, of course, he's going to make some mistakes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll get to yours again, Stephen. He sent another little sticker, super chat thing, and he had another question. Because look, this guy, if you don't know Stephen Sorensen, he loves history. He'll have tons of questions for you, especially with you being a historian. Scott Duke, thank you for the 5, my brother. I appreciate it. Always appreciate the help growing this channel, making this possible. What lost author, lost work would Dr. Mason love to have discovered the most, and why?
That is a what's the best value now? $1 million, let's say. It's not what it once was, but hey, it's pretty good. $1 million question. Why do I say that? When we at York University in Toronto, when we would interview people for jobs in classics, especially, that was one of the questions we like to ask them. And it's a really interesting question for many reasons. For example, it shows their knowledge of, all the works that have been named, but that don't exist anymore. So an author like Diogenes Laertius lists like tons of works by the people he mentions, and most of them we don't have anymore. What would I like? Well, that's a long list. But I guess I'd like the lost part of Tacitus' histories. That would be extremely valuable. The whole work that I'd like would be Strabo, or Strabo, if you like, Strabo's history. We have his geography, which is awesome. And he begins the geography by saying, well, just like I wrote in my history, I'm writing for you all, the same kind of people, but we don't have the history. And, being a historian, his geography is already incredibly valuable, like just enormously valuable on all kinds of levels, partly because he's reusing older sources and naming them sometimes and interacting with them. And those sources don't exist anymore. So that's amazing. But his history would be just fantastic to have because he's such a careful writer. So those would be my 2 biggest suggestions right off the bat. And then the rest of Polybius would be very nice as well. And I could go on, but that's enough, I guess.
All right. I'm going to ask Stephen Sorensen's question here. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the super chat. But I did want to ask, before I ask Stephen's here real quick, when you said the lost, what we have lost from Tacitus, how much did Tacitus rely on Josephus?
Yeah.
And you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to get lost in this because I know we probably could, but was Tacitus leaning on Josephus, or was it kind of a mutual, like they respect each other equally and it's like, yeah, they're kind of both on the same level? What would you say?
I am so glad you asked. Josephus, flourishes. He writes the war in the 70s. So while the Flavian regime is really consolidating peace in Rome, before they came to power was the year of the 4 emperors, this year of enormous upheaval after the death of Nero in 68. So 68, 69 is a disaster. And then they bring, 30 years of peace and actually set the table for the next century of peace under the so-called Antonine rulers. So, they are extremely important. Can you ask the question again? I lost my place.
How much does
Tacitus? Yeah. I started with the dates. Now Tacitus is writing in the early second. So he writes the Agricola maybe around 95, 96, but then he writes his histories and his annals in the early 2nd century. So he's actually a generation later than Josephus's war. Now the question is, did he use it? Did he use the war? Most scholars have said no. And they've said no for the same reason that they've said that Luke Acts in the New Testament did not know the works of Josephus. Namely, there are differences between them. So there's a lot of overlapping material, but they tell it differently. And this comes back to the very first question we were dealing with, reliability and accuracy. Because here's a crucial thing. When ancient writers used texts as sources, they did not, as a rule, they did not slavishly copy them. There are some exceptions, like Livy using Polybius at times. He kind of slavishly copies, translates him into Latin. But most often they did not. And the reason for that is all their training, and rhetoric is the big thing you train in the ancient world. Like rhetoric is the main subject. All of your training in rhetoric is to be creative. It's not about reproducing someone else's work. That's cheating, right? That would be like terrible cheating. You have to bring it over into your work and repurpose it and reshape it and redo it, even if you end up disagreeing with the person you're using, right? So you see this in the Gospels, for example. Matthew and Luke use Mark as a source, but they just flat out change stuff that they don't agree with. So that says something about the ancient idea of reliability. They're not fussed about that. They don't mind changing stuff that they don't think works for their story, right? So I won't get into the Gospels here, but it's the same thing with Josephus and the people who use Josephus. So when you look at Tacitus, there's a lot of really striking agreement between Tacitus and Josephus. So I would argue the only way to explain those agreements, like if I got two student essays and they had that kind of agreement between them, I would immediately say there's some kind of literary relationship here. Either A borrowed from B, or B borrowed from A, or A and B borrowed from C.
A common source,
like from Wikipedia or something, or what, or they both looked at the same textbook. That's just, those are the possibilities, because the English language is so rich and diverse that when you see continuing agreements, and it's the same with Greek, maybe even more so, in sentence structure and coming over into Latin, the Latin equivalents of Greek terms that are really very striking. Like you mentioned, Jesus ben Ananias, he's the seventh of these omens that Josephus lists in Book 6 of the War. Tacitus has 3 of Josephus's 6 omens before Jesus. Tacitus has them in Book 5 of the Histories, section 13. He has like 3 of them. He also has many of Josephus's very particular stories. Like, for example, Josephus tells this story when he's describing the Dead Sea region, and he says it's like that because of the story, the biblical story of God striking it with thunderbolts, and what was a fertile area has become barren. So he says that it has a certain kind of fruit that if you pick it up, it looks appealing. But when you kind of bite into it or you open it up, it's all ash inside. And it's like deceptive, right? And that's, they call it sometimes the apples of Sodom, Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, Tacitus knows the same story. Like, where does he get this from? This very particular thing that he mentions, I think in section 6 of Book 5 of the Histories, he recounts the same thing that Josephus has in Book 4 of the War. It's really striking agreement. So in my view, it's the same kind of thing you have with Luke Acts and Josephus. Luke Acts differs from Josephus, but he has much of the same material, which I think it's virtually impossible to explain except by literary dependence.
This is so... Stephen Sorensen, I'm getting your question, brother. Trust me. I just got to say this real quick. This is why parallelomania is easy to fall into. I mean, we could be like literally not realizing how many fossils, so to speak, textually, are really there. Like, are there genealogical connections between the ancient, Homeric epics and the Gospels? Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald says yes.
Yeah,
and others... Oh, yeah. I love him, man. I love it. And then other people go, well, it was in the air, and they knew of the stories. So they just kind of incorporated what was in the air. Yeah. And I'm more on the side of saying, is there really a genealogical? And so I just say that to say, like, there's literary freedom that these guys are taking. Yeah. And that literary freedom, might be things we're just skipping right over, not realizing, look, this guy used this, and we can't prove it because they took freedom. And if you say that there's a connection, parallelomania, you just want everything to match, and now you're stuck in this box, catch 22, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I just want to make that comment. And
well, I mean, I think both sides are right. There is such a thing as parallelomania, where, you know, for example, take that symbol of the swastika, right, the Nazi symbol. Well, you know, if you're visiting Jerusalem sometime, you look at the ancient site, you'll see patterns in the design that are swastika designs. That's because it was an ancient symbol. And of course, in the Jain religion in India and in Indian tradition, you know, you find the same symbol. And so parallelomania would say, you know, there's all kinds of intricate connections, but sometimes things just happen and we shouldn't press them. Or like the Star of David, what we call the Star of David was, you know, also the Seal of Solomon before that, very popular in Muslim culture. Is it, you know, so people see the thing, they see the symbol and they want to make a connection, but they can actually be quite different things, right?
Wow.
That kind of look the same. So I agree with people who say, be careful about parallelomania. On the other hand, as a historian, what you need to do is look for explanations. It's not about beliefs. Like, historians are not religious people. They might be religious people in their private lives, but not professionally. So our job is not to say what we believe. It's not to put forward things you should believe. Quite the opposite. It's about understanding. It's about understanding evidence and then explaining evidence and thinking, what's the best explanation of this? And we can disagree about the best explanation. So when I argue that Luke Acts is probably dependent on Josephus, there are people who don't agree with that, largely because we haven't, I think, because we haven't sat down and talked in a serious way and looked at the evidence.
We got to do a show on that, by the way.
Okay, but my point is, you know, you need to explain stuff. And for me, the conclusions don't actually matter very much. You know, that's not where I'm at. I don't, because conclusions come and go.
Yeah.
Right. Or at least they should. If you're a historian or like a scientist, you should be able to change your mind about the conclusion on the basis of different evidence and different ways of looking at things. You should be able to change your mind. So it's not about committing to conclusions. It's about how you get there. Right.
Dr. Mason, can you ask him about the difference between titling the war as Judeans versus Jewish Jews?
Stephen, you know too much, man. You know way too much here.
Right.
He may know that I published an article back in 2007 on arguing simply this, that for ancient historians, we always would translate the Greek and Hebrew terms. So I'm gonna drop the Hebrew and Greek terms here. Yehudi is the Hebrew term. Yehudi, the place Yehuda. This is what we usually call Jew and Judah or Judea. And then the Greek and Latin terms are very similar. Judaios, and Judea. I simply argued in this article that although we always translate, almost always until then, people would translate the place as Judea. So they would translate Judea, or they transliterate more properly, Judea as Judea. When it came to Judaios, they would translate it as Jew. Now, I simply argued, well, hang on, this is like for ancient ears. When ancients are looking at these things, they see a direct connection. A Judaios is somebody from Judea. A Judaios is the masculine ending of Judea, so the place is Judea, and a person from there is Judaios. So it would capture the ancient way of thinking better if we, as historians, and only for this purpose, as translators, for this technical purpose, if I transliterate as Judean in both cases. So the place is Judea, or Judea, and the people from there are Judeans. And that would convey in English what I'm seeing in the Greek text. Now, when Stephen asks, you know, what's better as a as the term. Again, this comes back to my point that I'm not about conclusions. I'm about how you get there. So for me, nothing's better. Depends on what your purpose is. So often, I titled my big book on the history of the Jewish War, A History of the Jewish War, not the Judean War. But when I am doing my technical work for translation purposes, like that red series I showed you behind me, I call it the Judean War. Because I think as a technical matter, that captures the ancient sense better. But if your question is a modern question, yeah, that's the one. But if your question is a modern one, and you're asking about Jews in the ancient world, and you're stressing the continuity between modern Jews and ancient Jews, I can see why people want to talk about Jews in the ancient world. So they're just asking a different question. They're coming from a different angle. I have no problem with that. The Greek and the Latin and the Hebrew are what they are. Yehudi, Judaios, they're not going to change. Those texts are there. The question is how we bring them over into English. And my answer to that is it depends on what you're trying to do. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about, what's your purpose? What are you trying to achieve?
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Pet Mark asks again, meant the take of Masada first by an unnamed group and later by another commanded by Menahem in Book 2.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So he's not even, I don't know, Pet, I guess is not even asking about Book 7, about the Roman capture of Masada. Pet is asking about books 1 and 2, I guess, of the war. Yeah. So simply there's, I think I see, in Book 2, there are two. Yeah. I got it, I think. It's simply a matter of Josephus not clarifying. I don't think there are two episodes there. So what happens is the first group goes out from Jerusalem. There's factional fighting within Jerusalem, in part because people don't know how best to respond to the auxiliary garrison of soldiers that is raiding the temple for funds and beating up any Judeans who get in their way. And they're even crucifying prominent Judeans in Jerusalem who are giving them grief as they try to rob the temple. Why are they robbing the temple? Because young Nero, the emperor, is telling his agent, his procurator, to do that, to get money out of the temple because he's in desperate financial shape. Not only in Judea, he's raiding the temples everywhere in his empire to get money. But the temple in Jerusalem is very wealthy. It's the only temple of Judeans all over the world, so they send all kinds of money there. And Nero is getting his agents to raid the temple. And the Judeans who are there, some of them say, back off, don't cause trouble, just let this pass. We don't want to fight the Romans. Others want to fight the Romans or want to fight the auxiliary garrison that is stationed there. What are they going to fight with? Well, one group goes to Masada, which was this desert outpost that King Herod had, where he had stored weapons. And weapons, not machine guns, but like swords and spears, like professional weapons designed to be used by ancient soldiers, maybe bows and arrows and things, but definitely the spears, javelins, swords. They would need to be sharpened after all this time, but they're professionally made weapons sitting at Masada. So one group goes and gets them, brings them back to Jerusalem. Then later, the story is, I think this is what Pet is referring to. Then this other group goes back and is able. One group takes. Let me clarify this. One group takes Masada from the auxiliary force. Then another group under Menachem is able to go back and get weapons from there. So I think the question is, what's the relationship between those two episodes? Josephus doesn't clarify it. I think there's no big problem there. I think he just doesn't clarify it. But that clearly the people who go to get the weapons can do it. They're welcome there. So I think there must be some fellow feeling between those two groups. But simply we don't know. This is a crucial point for historians. You have to be able to say, like scientists, a good scientist should be able to say, we don't know. Um, and the problem is that everybody wants to know, and they view history as a matter of belief. It's like, what do you believe happened? I don't believe that happened. I believe this happened. Well, from a historian's point of view, you have to say, hey, come on, we don't know, right? It's all a matter of making arguments.
Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, hit that like button. 180, 170 something people total on Facebook and YouTube watching right now. Hit that like button, guys. This is really fascinating information. I want to ask a few questions that are kind of, well, it's just stuff that I've been thinking New Testament connections, of course, but we're going to do shows. I'd like to, if I can get your time, of course, to do some stuff on the overlaps between Luke, Acts, and Josephus. But the idea, I had a really, really wonderful show I did with a lady named Lena Einhorn. And
yes.
Have you heard of her?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we corresponded a while back. Yeah. You mean the time shift hypothesis?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the things that I'm not trying to get rabbit trailed into her thesis or anything like that. What I'm actually asking is, I had someone the other day, and this is just a personal question. You guys super chat if you want like to have a question answered, whatever. I'm asking Dr. Mason a question myself. I got everybody's questions I've been asking, so it's my turn to ask one now. There's a prodigal son parable. Plays a prominent role in John, I believe, or Luke. I can't remember, but
Luke.
Definitely
it's in Luke. Yeah.
Okay, it's not in Mark, it's not in Matthew. Matthew seems to be very like, don't go to the Samaritans, don't go to the Gentiles, but only Jews, or lost sheep of the house of Israel. In Luke, this prodigal son parable, I wanted to ask your thoughts. Could this son be the Samaritans because of the Jew Samaritan rift tree contemporaneous to what's going on? Do you think that the prodigal son was a Samaritan?
Why? I'm not quite sure I follow. Why would you think that, Derek? I mean,
well, the reason is there's this thesis called the two house theory. It's the idea that the lost tribes would somehow come back, and they seem to be sons of the same father. And I suspect the parable is saying, look, the father could be Abraham. I don't know who he's analogous to, but one of them is a good Jew. The other one is a wanderer. He's kind of doing his own thing, and he seems to be from the same family in the parable. So I asked that because another person, Russell Gamirkin, and I don't know if you've heard of Russell.
Yeah, sure.
So he's mentioned, that he thinks this might be a Jew-Samaritan rift, but Luke, notice, is the only guy who starts to mend it.
Yeah.
Which is why Jesus saying not to go to the Samaritans, not to go to the Gentiles, Luke's having them go to them. In fact, he's saying, hey, I got a great story. There's a good Samaritan. You want to know about him? You know what I mean? And so it makes me think there's a social identity crisis that's trying to be fixed when Gentiles start to come into the church more. And it's not just Jewish. It's now becoming it's not just about the Jews now. We've got a bigger thing going on. And Samaritans, come on in, man. You guys are good people. You know what I mean? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that you just put your finger on a good example of what we were talking about before, how each writer has a program, an agenda, if you like, a purpose, an aim, and they will configure the evidence to fit that aim. So just to give you a quick example of what I'm talking about, Mark famously presents the disciples as pretty useless people. I mean, they just don't get it. Repeatedly don't get it. Jesus, feeds the 5,000. They say, oh, wow, that's impressive. Then the 4,000 are gathered there in Mark. And it's like, where are we going to feed all these people? Did you not see the feeding of the 5,000? They don't get it. And Peter doesn't have faith, walking on the water. It collapses in the water. All the stories about the disciples and even the whole gospel ends almost with Peter breaking down as a nervous breakdown. And that's it. Like he denies Jesus and then has a nervous breakdown. But Matthew is all about redeeming these stories, so to speak. Matthew gives each one of them a happy ending. So Peter does finally walk on the water. When in Mark, Jesus tells Peter, get behind me, Satan, and what you said about me is wrong. In Matthew, the author tells the same story. Who do men say that I am? So, some say this, some say that. And then I think you are the Christ. Then in Matthew, it's like big celebration. Yes, that's it. It's God told you that, and you are Peter, and I'm going to, what's written inside the Vatican, the St. Peter's Basilica, you are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. That's all from Matthew 16, right? So the author doesn't have any hesitation about completely transforming Mark's story, even though he takes Mark over bodily, he transforms it. I would say the same thing's going on with Luke. So each one of these authors has an agenda, a story they want to tell, and even if they're using material from the others, like Q, the so-called Q or Mark, they're not just simply borrowing it; they are reworking it to tell what they want to tell. I don't see any reason to think that the prodigal son story has anything to do with Samaritans, but you make a good point about the Samaritan rift. So this comes through repeatedly. I mean, Luke is the one who has the Good Samaritan story, right? In Luke chapter 10, this is the story of, unbelievably, all these good Jerusalem people pass by this poor guy who's been beaten up on the road, and it's a Samaritan of all people, because Jesus has asked the question, who's my neighbor? Like, who's, who can be my friend, my buddy? And Jesus says, look, even a Samaritan, whom you guys hate, I'll tell you a story about this. And similarly, in John chapter 4, you have the story of Jesus going into Samaria and meeting the Samaritan woman who says, why are you talking to me? Like, we don't have anything to do with each other. So that rift between Judeans and Samaritans was real in the first century. It's mentioned by Tacitus. Josephus says a lot about it, actually, that Judeans would not walk through, if they could help it, would not go through Samaria from Galilee to Jerusalem. They would go down by the Jordan Valley because it's too dangerous and people would get murdered, going through Samaria. It was really, serious tensions at the time. So yeah, there's that is there. So I'm saying, yes, that rift that you talk about is exactly there, but I don't see why the prodigal son story would have anything to do with it. The other quick point to make about that is parables and allegories are in principle two different things. And what you were suggesting here is a kind of way of allegorizing the parable, saying this means that, this means this person represents Abraham, this person represents that. A thing to remember about parables is they are usually geared to make one point. So it's not like they're allegories. They could be. Right. They could be allegories, but they're not usually. They are, let me give you an example, like about the woman who, lost something valuable, or about the guy who welcomed back, like the lost sheep, the one, he only lost one sheep. He had 100. He could have just said, well, I got 99 still. But no, he was actually really, really happy to have the one back. Well, that's like how God is. But that doesn't mean you have to have each of those sheep, or the black sheep is this and other 99 sheep or that.
What's the ethnic identity of that sheep?
Right. No. It's just like, this is the point of the story, right? It's got one point. But an allegory is something different, right? It's where you say, it's like what Mark does with the parable of the sower. And that's why people were really suspicious that about Mark chapter 4, where he gives the interpretation of the parable, and then he allegorizes. He said the seed is the word, and this is that, and the stony ground is this. And scholars long ago said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like a parable. That sounds like an allegory of a later time. Anyway, I've said enough.
No, that's also why Dr. Richard Carrier believes that Mark is an allegory. He does. I mean, overall, he thinks that there's so much. It's like the allegory gospel, and so but he knows what he's talking about on that. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there because I noticed in the latest gospel, John, all of a sudden Jesus walks up to a woman at the well, and she says, "Our Father." Well, what was the contention? You're not really Abraham's seed. You guys aren't really Abraham's child. She's saying Jacob, her father, dug this well. And Jesus didn't go, oh, hold on, young lady. You're not actually a descendant of Jacob. You're not from Israel, actually. No, he says, oh, you worship on that mountain. We worship on this mountain. eventually spirit and truth. That's what we're going to worship in. And so I just thought it was interesting to see social identity start to decay. The whole that wall of separation was interesting.
Yeah.
So that's just one of my boring side topics that I like to talk about. And most of my fans are like, what are you talking about, man? I don't care about that. Did Jesus exist or not? Or whatever. So I just figure, just throw that out there because I'm interested in the social identity concepts within the Gospels. And Josephus, historically discusses there were issues between Jews and Samaritans, and people who hold to this thesis, it's called the two-house thesis. They think that the two sticks that are supposed to come back, that goes back to northern Israel and the southern tribes of Judah. And this comes to another question with Josephus, real quick. Dustin Ellerby, man, thank you, bro. Appreciate it. Super sticker. I got a super sticker.
Okay.
This is something in Josephus that we find, and I think Jews might have had a different concept about the lost tribes. But in Josephus, as an expert on Josephus, and knowing like the background and things like that, I'd love to ask you this. He talks about the 10 tribes being east, I suspect, of the Euphrates, in a land that, it's kind of fictional. It's kind of like there's this mythological motif about the lost tribes of Israel, and they're out there, and but they're innumerable. They're it's almost like in this far, far away land, and God's going to bring them back. Don't worry, it's going to happen. He has this concept that they're out there. Acts has this concept that the diaspora Jews kind of collectively are the 12 tribes idea. In the beginning of Acts, all you men and brethren of all Israel, all these ideas of these diaspora Jews from different regions are getting it. What's going on here, man? I'm confused. I'm trying to figure out, why is Josephus still running off this motif? He acts like the northern tribes are east of the Euphrates. The book of Acts is portraying Jews as the diaspora. It seems like Matthew is acting like the lost tribes of the house of Israel are Jews. Not anyone else, just the Jews. Because he says, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans. So do you know anything about this in Josephus and how that matters?
No.
Interesting.
No, I'm sorry. That's I'm just trying to yank your chain there.
Oh gosh.
But what I would say is I shouldn't get into it now because in spite of the flattering remarks you made about me, I feel like I'm just beginning with Josephus, and to make the connections, to follow the connections that you just laid out there, I would need to actually consult the texts, and because this is not at all fresh in my mind, I don't see the connections that you're making. So rather than say something useless about it, offer a pointless opinion, I would rather take the time to look at it, Derek, and
please
give a proper answer. Yeah,
that was the best response that you could have made, because I just would rather see what you have to say as someone who knows Josephus and his text very well. Maybe you come to some conclusions, and of course I plan on hopefully doing more with you. By the way, our friend Tim Mills did pop in, and he said something positive. I can't remember, but something positive, of course.
Yeah, I saw
Harmonic
it.
atheist.
I saw it. It was very generous of him. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was one of the most scholarly things you could say, is that I don't know, and when I have a better explanation, I will. But I do think that there's different opinions on how Jews portrayed or thought about their lost brethren from 8 centuries BC. There's this motif that plays in the prophets, and so just wanted to get your take on it. But
can I have a quick stab at diaspora, though?
Please.
Here's another category that I think we should dispense with. So diaspora, some of your viewers will know, it means dispersion, right? And it comes from the idea from Deuteronomy 28 that one of the curses on Israel, if they don't follow the law, is that they will be dispersed. And in ancient thinking, this is a bad thing to be, right? Because safety is together. Prosperity comes from flourishing together in your land, your crops. So the worst things that can happen to you are you're overrun by foreigners and you are dispersed, you're scattered. Well, this became a major Christian topos, a major Christian theme about the Jews. So you see in Tertullian and authors like that in the late 2nd century, 3rd century, constantly talking about the Jews are dispersed. They don't have a homeland anymore because God destroyed Jerusalem in punishment of the Jews for their faithlessness, not because they didn't follow the law. They followed it too much and they didn't accept Christ. And so God destroyed Jerusalem and scattered the Jews. So this idea of diaspora, dispersion, is actually primarily a Christian way of explaining Jews. It's not a Jewish way. And if you look at the 1st century, what have you got? You got Jerusalem and its hinterland, that's Judea and Galilee. But here's the problem with diaspora, is that people use it as a category, as if there was like ancient Israel, which is sort of like the modern state of Israel, and everything outside of that is the diaspora. But the problem with that is that there was nothing like the state of Israel in the 1st century. There was Judea, there was Jerusalem, the homeland of the Jewish people or Judean people, and Galilee, where a large part had migrated, and the region right around there. But all along the coast and Samaria in between, and the Decapolis cities, the 10 cities, the Greek cities of, up in the northeast, separating Galilee from Judea, these were all non-Judeans, non-Jews. So they didn't know that they were living in a Jewish homeland. They didn't know they were living in Israel. They were living in cities that were like 6,000 years old, much older than Jerusalem. And they figured they were the proper inhabitants of those places. So, I think we should be careful. If we're thinking about how the ancients actually viewed their world, they didn't know they were living in either the diaspora or the homeland. They just knew they were either living in Judea, which was the homeland, but that's the hill country around Jerusalem, or they weren't. So if you're living in Caesarea by the coast, or Scythopolis up in the northeast, or Ascalon, you're not in Judea. You're in a foreign place where they have foreign gods and foreign customs and laws. You're not in Judea. So that's why I want to challenge this idea. Maybe, yeah.
Interesting. Dustin Ellerby, thank you, my friend. I appreciate the 5 on the super chat. Always appreciate that. Seriously. John Pilch has a lecture on Paul. I don't know if you know who that is. That he explains who Paul is writing to Israelites living amongst the nations. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, that's a tricky one, because Paul says he makes a big deal of being the apostle that nobody else recognizes. He says, if I'm not an apostle to anybody else, I am to you, my followers. So he's the apostle that no one recognizes to the non-Jews. That's what he says repeatedly. He says in Galatians, I was called from birth to bring this, he has a technical term, evangelion, which we normally translate as gospel. But Paul sees this as his own particular message that he was chosen by God to bring to the non-Jews. And he says, the other guys were going to the Jews, Peter, the original apostles, Jesus' original students, James, his brother, they were all reaching out to Jews. I was given this thing for the non-Jews. And in Romans, when he finally writes Romans, he says to the Romans, all my work has been among non-Jews. And I've been collecting money from the non-Jews, the Gentiles, to take to Jerusalem, for example, to the Jews, the Jewish Christians, to show them as a sign of good faith. That kind of thing.
Why didn't Paul just say, like the book of James, like First Peter, which I think it's a forgery, but either way, why didn't he just say to the lost house of Israel? Why didn't he just say that? If he's talking to Israelites, why couldn't he have just said, I am writing to you, the church of Rome, to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, or to the 10 northern tribes? Or why does he always use that term? And I say that because I'm not convinced of this thesis that Paul's Gentiles are actual Israelites that are among the nations. And so
I don't think they can be, actually. That's my view. I don't think they can be. He's very clear that they're not Jews.
So
That's
see how you conflated though Israel and Jews. I have to say this because there's definitional terms that they define differently.
yeah, but
Yeah.
he connects them. He connects them. So, for example, in Galatians and in Romans and in Philippians, when he talks about his own background, I'm an Israelite from the tribe of Benjamin, circumcised on the 8th day, all of that kind of stuff, bringing out his Jewish credentials, right? Because the idea is that you should follow what people are saying to his converts is you need to follow Jewish law, and Paul is telling them to take a hike, right? Go away. He calls them dogs. He calls them servants of Satan. He calls them false apostles. I mean, he doesn't really hold back. He says that his former life under the law, following the law, he counts as, polite translation, manure, dung in Philippians 3. So it's pretty clear, it seems to me, what he's on about. I don't think he feels in any way, I don't think it's possible. He says things like, you used to worship other gods. You used to do this. I don't see the reason to connect his audiences with Israel or with Judaism.
I could paint a picture for you, but we don't have time to paint a picture as to why there's this motif in the prophets to try and make that claim. But we'll definitely have time at some point because I plan on hanging out with you more, and I got to get to the next questions. But Dustin, thank you, bro. I know what you're doing, man. I know exactly what you're doing, and it's cool. It's fine because I love talking about this stuff. But he's a really cool guy. Like there's some people out there that I try not to. I just don't deal with some people because there's no academic open-mindedness to like considering could I be wrong. They're not really. There's kind of an agenda for why they conclude, and they think that you cannot disagree with this position, or you look like an idiot, or you don't know what you're talking about. No. Yeah. Jason Stewart, you rock. Thank you for the 2. I don't even play around on what kind of money this is because I get like people from all over the world that'll super chat, and there's different stuff like Ron. I looked it up. It's Romanian or something. I don't even know. It's like different stuff. I think that's euros, but
it's euro. Yeah.
Okay.
It's from my environment here. We use euro. Yeah.
I thought aren't you in Canada?
No, I'm in the Netherlands. I'm in Holland.
No wonder why your time is different. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What does Dr. Mason think of Josephus' account of James? Does this get us kind of lost into the discussion that we should probably hold off and keep his question open for on the Jesus question?
Yeah, maybe. But I can give a quick answer.
Please.
Which is that in book 20 of the Antiquities, Josephus is writing about, he's not writing about James, really. He's writing about what's going on in the early 60s in Jerusalem. And he says that one of the low-level governors died in office. And before his replacement could arrive, there was this high priest, Ananus II. And in the war, Josephus had kind of looked up to this guy. He praised him. For some reason or other, he gives him bad press. And he says he belonged to the sect of the Sadducees, and they were really kind of violent people. They just like to do exactly what the law says. So if the law says stone people or kill people for these crimes, you do it. Whereas the Pharisees tried to kind of soften the laws, where the Sadducees were harsh, savage. So he gives, as an illustration of that, just to illustrate this guy's character, he says, well, he had a bunch of enemies and he got rid of them before that Roman governor could arrive, the new Roman governor. He just took advantage of his absence to, without due process, just get rid of some of his enemies. And among them was this guy, the brother of the so-called Christ, James, and a bunch of other people. So very simply, what do I think of the passage? I think it makes the best sense, simply, if he had previously referred to a guy known as the Christ. In book 18, this is now book 20. So then he's saying, well, the guy I told you about before, I'll mention his brother is one of the victims of this chapter. I can tell you, I can single him out because you already know I mentioned the guy who was called the Christ before. Well, this is his brother. And that's how he introduces him. He doesn't say James was like this and then he was the brother of, he says one of his victims was the brother of the so-called Christ, or the one called Christ. James, it was his name. And then there were some other guys. Anyway, let me get on with my story. And that's it. And that's very typical of Josephus. He likes to take one example. It's typical of many ancient authors, like to make things vivid. Instead of just saying there was a group of people, they'll pull out one of them who's interesting for some reason, and make it more real to the reader. So that's what I think. That's what I think about the passage in a nutshell.
We're going to have to do a full 60 minutes, probably, or 30 to 60 minutes on the Josephus stuff with Jesus and dealing with this Paul or with James, however much time it might take. But we'll definitely do that on another live.
Okay.
My good friend Joel Pearson, man, thank you, bro, gave me a 5, and that's not the same symbol, is it?
That's pounds, yeah.
Okay.
He's in the UK.
He's in the UK.
I'm assuming, yeah.
What do you think about his question? Were the Jews allowed to execute blasphemers without Roman permission? And if so, what kind of execution?
Yeah, well, that's back when I was doing my doctorate. We have to do in Canada. You have to do these things called comprehensive exams, where you're supposed to show your sort of mastery of not of reality, but of scholarship on like what researchers have been saying. One of the big questions was, did the Jews have the power of capital punishment? So this is like what Joel is asking here is like a big question that's been much debated, because of course you have contrary evidence. That's why it's debated. The long and the short of it is that it looks like I think the best evidence is that in normal conditions, the Jews did not have in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem leaders did not have the legal power of capital punishment, simply because that was reserved for the Roman governor. So the story in Acts 20 is precisely that this guy is taking advantage of the absence of a governor to get rid of his opponents without due process, because due process would have required going with the Roman governor. The Jewish law did make provisions for execution. So in the Mishnah, rabbinic literature, you have a whole tractate called Sanhedrin, and another one about punishments and stripes, it's called, for whippings, corporal punishment. But in the tractate Sanhedrin, you have all these rules about who can be executed and what you have to do in order to execute people. So there were laws. There was Jewish law about this. And of course, the Bible itself already lays out the death penalty for all kinds of crimes. But the fact is that in the first century, under Roman rule, the Jewish leaders could not simply execute people. That said, that doesn't cover issues like lynching. People just like the mob rule, right? People grabbing somebody and killing them. So in the book of Acts, that's how the death of Stephen is presented, not as a judicial killing, but simply people getting together and saying, let's kill this guy. He's a nuisance. In Acts, however, it's building on Luke, and there the story is clearly that you need the Roman governor. So the way that Acts presents it is that Jesus was killed really by the Jews, but by the hands of Pilate. He was sort of their puppet because he had to do the actual deed. But then in John, you have a clear statement that the Jews did not have the power of capital punishment. So there are all these factors that go into the discussion. But I think it's pretty clear, on balance, that the Roman governor reserved that power to himself legally under normal conditions. But then there's lots of exceptions when regrettable incidents happen, as they always have happened in real life.
Well, that's a sobering statement, I think, and I appreciate you answering that. Thanks for that super chat, Joel, man. I appreciate you, bro. We got to catch up sometime too. I noticed that we have 93 likes, and there's like 194 people combining Facebook and YouTube, and I can't understand why 100 people cannot hit that like button. I just can't. It's maybe cognitive dissonance on my part. Is it too far to reach and just hit that damn button? I don't know. Anyway, it helps us grow. It helps this channel grow. It helps YouTube take a look and go, hey, what's this myth vision thing? Let's promote that thing out there. Let's get more people aware of this content. And that way Dr. Mason's stuff can get out there. That way Dr. Price, I love educating, man. And I love learning this stuff. Like I'm in a college room right now with you and learning stuff that people pay top dollar to go to college and learn a lot of this material, and to hear you lecture and stuff. I'm just thankful to have you on here. So thank you so much again for doing this. And
well, thank you.
More,
I'll remind you that we are winging it here, right? It's not exactly a lecture, but I'm having fun with it. So as long as you are, it's good.
I'm having a blast. I think the hip fire shots from our audience this is fun. It's definitely unorthodox, but it's awesome. Pet Mark, once again, thank you so much, my friend. In Antiquities is said that Aretas took Macaras, and next is told that Antipas imprisoned John the Baptist there. Is not that part an interpolation?
Yeah. This is going to be a topic for another time. The whole John the Baptist story. I would qualify Pet's observation a little bit. Let me just briefly explain. Aretas is Aretas IV. He's the king of the Nabateans, and that's what the Romans called the Arab nation that bordered to the south of Judea. So Judea extended both east of the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, and that's where Machaerus is, the place being referred to here. It's in modern Jordan today. Many people haven't heard about it. Almost everybody's heard about Masada, because Masada is in Israel, and it's a big tourist resort. Machaerus is becoming that. The Jordanians are gradually building it up to be much more promoted as a tourist site. But for the moment, the excavations are still going on there by a Hungarian team. Anyway, enough about that. But the point is, the story in Josephus. Yeah, he doesn't exactly say that Aretas took it there. He says he's talking about a conflict between Aretas IV and Antipas, Herod Antipas, the son of King Herod, whose territory included Perea. So he's got Galilee up in the north, and he's got Perea across the Jordan River. And the story is, Josephus tells in some detail that Herod Antipas was a kind of a fiend. So he had a political marriage to the daughter of King Aretas IV. So this is a political union, so that Antipas and the neighboring king would get along fine. A marriage blessed by Rome, presumably. But when he was visiting Rome one time, he kind of fell for, I don't know if that's a dignified term for it, his brother's wife, and really wanted to marry her. So he assured her that there's no problem. He would get rid of wife number one. But she got wind of this story, Aretas' daughter, and she fled from Perea, or from Galilee, down to Machaerus. And the story seems to suggest, depends how you read it exactly, that it was in the hands of, or very nearby, the countryside nearby was in the hands of these sheikhs, these tribal leaders loyal to Aretas IV, and they escorted her. So she made it to Machaerus, which is on the frontier between Antipas territory in Perea and Aretas territory, and then she was able to be escorted home. So, and she's safe, and she gets away from this wretched husband who has been unfaithful to her. So I can see Pet's question. It looks like in that story that the fortress is in the hands of Aretas IV. That in itself, let's say that that's the implication of the story. That in itself is not enough to say that the John the Baptist story is an interpolation. There's all kinds of other issues you have to consider before you get to that point. So short answer to your question, if I can still call this a short answer, is I don't think so. I don't think that in itself would make it an interpolation. First of all, because it's not clear that's how the story should be read. But yeah, I get what you're saying. That is the kind of implication of it, that it was in Aretas' control. Josephus doesn't exactly say that. But anyway, there are other issues to be taken into account with the John the Baptist story, which really should be for another time, I think.
Awesome. And we'll have plenty of that. Look, I really appreciate it. There's so many great comments and questions and things like that. Stephen Sorensen, again, he has a good question. Real quick, Joel Pearson says, if Dr. Mason's in Holland, is he now required to put chocolate sprinkles on everything? So,
yes.
Here's Stephen's question. Can you ask about any forgeries done by Josephus or forgeries made by later authors attributed to Josephus?
Well. Yeah, this could be answered on many different levels. So first of all, I mean, my short answer is no. But there are lots of things. For example, there are texts that have come down in the name of Josephus, like 4th Maccabees. There's a very famous text, Jewish text, that was transmitted alongside Josephus's works. And its title is really not 4th Maccabees, but On the Supremacy of Reason, or the Reasoning Power over the Passions. And in fact, careful study shows it has a lot of Josephus vocabulary in it. I mean, that's what modern scholars can find out, sort of typical Josephus vocabulary. It was handed down with his works, and people thought, probably because of these overlaps in vocabulary, they thought it was by Josephus, but you can't really call that a forgery. I think when people talk about forgeries, they're looking more at passages like the paragraph on Jesus in Antiquities 1863 to 4. And some people have argued that the John the Baptist thing a bit later in Antiquities 115 and following is a forgery. Some people have argued that if not a forgery, an interpolation, which amounts to the same thing, a Christian insertion into the text. Some people have argued that about even the little James bit in Antiquities 20. So, I mean, people have argued all kinds of stuff. If you look on the internet, you'll find the argument that Josephus's works as a whole were actually constructed by the Flavian regime in some way. So whether Josephus himself or somebody else also wrote the New Testament. The Flavian regime wanted to replace Judaism or something like that. And that's why you see similarities between Josephus and the New Testament. So there are many. I'm not sure what's behind the question. So I can't really answer it from the point of view of the questioner. But what I can say is I don't think we have the works of Philo of Alexandria were transmitted by Christians. And there's lots of stuff in Philo, I mean, that you would think a Christian author might want to change or adapt to Christian usage. But you don't really see anything like that in the manuscripts of Philo. I think it's very similar with Josephus. There's very little in there, if anything. I mean, we have to wrestle with these passages I mentioned. But by and large, it's not like Christians had a field day with these texts and were interpolating stuff all over the place. That's just not the case. So we can keep an open mind about the other things, whether there are forgeries, but being common, no, it's not common.
Thank you. Okay. And Stephen, I'm sure you can get up with me later and ask some questions. I'll send them to you, Dr. Mason, and you can say what you want to, you go through it and see if it's some of the stuff that you'd like to cover, whatever, I want to give you that opportunity. This is hip fire. You guys are like, he's not even sure what you're going to ask, So Arjen van de Weerd, I hope I'm saying that correct every time I say
Arjen van der Weerd, yeah.
Arjen. I say this so strictly, like Arjen van de Weerd.
Yeah.
I'm horrible with trying to pronounce stuff like that. So thank you for that Super chat, my friend. Did King Aretas ever control Damascus? Please ask Dr. Mason to share his address in L. I am Dutch.
He's just kidding. In Netherlands, yeah. He's saying he's Dutch. Can he have my address? I'm in Groningen. Groningen is the northern pronunciation of where the town that I'm in. So Arjen will know this very well. And he can always reach me through the university. I'm emeritus professor there now. I've taken retirement, but I'm still connected with the faculty, so he can find me there. Did Aretas ever control Damascus? Yes, for a short time, apparently. So as a consequence of this this war, it appears. I mean, Paul mentions this very clearly in 2 Corinthians, that he says he was let down over the wall when he had to escape from Damascus when Aretas IV was controlling the town. And this has all kinds of knock-on effects for the chronology of Paul's career. I have a very good friend in, are you in North Carolina?
I am.
Yeah. So
right, I'm an hour and 15 minutes from Duke University, which I just went the other day and interviewed an upcoming PhD student, Ian Mills and stuff. I'm about to interview with Dr. Bart Ehrman on the 5th of May. Dude, I'm taking Myth Vision to another level, baby.
Yeah, you are, man. You are. You are. Well, I have a good friend there, Douglas Campbell, who we were just corresponding about this, actually, because it has to do with chronology of Paul's career, and that's one of his special areas. So yeah, but yeah, the short answer, yes.
Awesome. Yeah. I hope that answered it. I really appreciate that. You got to hook me up with some of these scholars for sure in the field, especially if they're local. I'll drive up and take my camera gear. I've got, all my camera stuff with my hardware and things like that, and record it in person because the quality is just impeccable. And it's really cool to sit and, talk with them in person and interview and whatnot. Maybe one day I'll be able to meet up with you too.
Yeah, come on over.
I won't be able to. They'll know I'm a foreigner for sure. There's just
it's the same. It's the same with all of us. Yeah, I have conversations. I try in Dutch. Today I had to talk to a couple of people. One about my internet service. And I try in Dutch, and we get as far as we can, and then they just kind of switch into English lots of times when they hear how bad it is. So don't worry about it. The Dutch are extremely friendly, and most of them, especially younger Dutch people under, say, 50, 60, speak pretty good English, sometimes amazingly good English.
Wow. Yeah.
So.
Wow. Oh, well, look, I caught up. Everybody, thank you so much for all the super chats. That obviously helps me with the channel. It helps me keep doing this as a full-time thing and bringing you on this. Like, we were going to just pre-record. We were just going to talk about the life of Josephus and get into what did he do? What was some of the career things he did? And that was it. And then I said, what would you want to go live? You want to try and go live? And he's like, yeah, that's actually sounds like more fun even. And so we just did this at the last second, jumped on live and came on here and said, let's talk about Josephus's life. And then whoever has questions will jump into their questions. So this was seriously fun. I want to tell everybody who's on right now watching, we're at 101 likes, 189 viewers on YouTube, and 194 total if you count Facebook. There's some people who need to hit that like button. And I have magical powers, okay? And I can bless you, or I can do the naughty if you don't hit that like button. So I have to let everyone know, just a warning, hit that like button, please. Let's get close to concluding here.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that we can go into. I want to read your book before we do any more, at least read some of it and get into some of this material.
My book?
Books.
No, I'm joking, man.
I'm going to communicate with you too and find out which one you think I should read first too, because you know probably where I need to start as a student, as someone who's new in this subject too. I want to do more of these. I'd love to have more of these conversations with you and have more people's questions answered, but also dive deep, because this guy is so important. Like, he touches almost everything on the pagan world and the Jewish world, Christianity.
Well, I told you, man, I'm just scratching the surface here.
How many years have you been doing this?
Well, too many, probably 40 years, I guess. Yeah.
on Josephus.
Well, it's not, as you said before, it's not just Josephus. I mean, I don't sit there staring at Josephus' works all day. It's like 95% of my work is outside Josephus because it's contextual, right? It's like trying to understand really what's in his environment, what's he playing off against, what's he using, what's he expect his audience to understand. Like, I'll give you a quick example when he says, okay, this is when this war broke out in Rome after Nero's death. And then he says, lots of people have written about this, so I'm not even going to go into it. I'm just going to mention this one guy, but you already know about that. So that's an idea of what he's playing off against, right? So then you have to try to figure out, well, what accounts is he talking about? That kind of stuff. That's where I spend most of my time, looking at archaeology, looking at the environment of Josephus' works, which I've already read a few times, and I spend my days often now translating and commenting on for future volumes in that read series. But in order to write the commentary, like when he mentions a certain site, then you have to go look at the archaeology of that site and have a better idea of what he maybe had in mind, and so on.
Have you traveled to these places too that you're
writing
mostly about?
Yeah. Everything I'm writing about now, I've traveled to. Yeah. Like Machaerus is a fantastic site in Jordan, for example. Not very well known, but it will be. It will be because the team there is trying to get it ready because Josephus says that's where John the Baptist was killed. That's not what the Gospels say, which is really interesting. And that's a little clue about why I don't think the Josephus passage is a Christian interpolation. The Gospels imply that he was killed in Galilee. So that's a big problem, to have him killed in this outpost in the middle of nowhere, a desert. That doesn't suit the story of the birthday party from Antipas. So anyway, they're trying to get this ready so that what they think is the 2000th anniversary of John the Baptist's death will be in 2030. So I think the hope is that Machaerus in Jordan will really take off as a major tourist site, around the time of his 2000th anniversary for his death.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Oh man, This is good. This is good. Thank you so much. I can't really think of anything. How can people, can they contact you, or is there some way they can help in some way? Is there something that you have that you would recommend them maybe to do in any way they can maybe help you?
I feel incredibly fortunate in life, and I don't feel I desperately need help. There are a lot of people in the world who can really use help, and I'm not one of them. I mean, I have a great family and friends and all that. So thank you for the thought, Derek. I appreciate it. But I feel incredibly fortunate in life. So I'm sure that, people can find others who really, really could use help, especially in these times we're living in right now. But thank you for the thought. And I would tell you if it were the case, but no. But if people want to get in touch, they can get in touch through my university email address if they would like. It's on the university website, but it's s.mason. So my name, Steve Mason, s.mason at, it looks like rug, but that's the Dutch word for rug, which is the University of Groningen, .nl. So it's s.mason at rug.nl. If they would like to get in touch, I'd be happy to hear from anybody. If they, almost anybody, it depends what they have to say. But yeah, they can do that.
Right. Be cautious. Just watch where you're treading. Okay. No, I'm just kidding. I definitely hope that some people reach out to you. This was such a fun time. I didn't know how this would go. It went really, really well. And I learned a lot. So for anyone who's watching, before you tune out, if they're going to purchase one of the books that you've written, which one, if they're new to the subject matter, would you recommend them read?
It depends which angle they're coming from. There are two that are aimed really at beginning readers of Josephus. So one, if they are New Testament readers, if that's their main interest and they're looking at the background, I wrote Josephus and the New Testament precisely for that readership. The second edition is the one to get because it's completely changed It's expanded, and it's 2003. So it's the revised edition. If for other readers, the orientation to the history of Roman Judea. So that's not really about the New Testament at all. It's just trying to understand. It's not really about Josephus either, but it's about trying to understand ancient ways of thinking, ancient categories, ancient geography, how the ancients thought about the world, and Roman Judea's place in that world. So that would be another starting place. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I want everybody else who's watching to, because they come up with creative questions based on their level of understanding, and sometimes they just blow me away. And
yeah, some of these questions have actually been pretty knowing. Yeah, quite surprised me. Yeah.
Well, let's do this again.
Yeah. Happy to, my friend. Yeah.
In like 2 hours. No, I'm just kidding with you. Look, enjoy your evening. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, hit that like button before you leave, please. Share this out with somebody who might be interested in the subject matter. Leave a comment even after the live's gone. And, if you're watching this afterwards, hopefully we can catch you next live. I look forward to doing this again with Dr. Mason. Tomorrow, I'm interviewing with Professor Joel Baden on his the development of the Pentateuch and renewing the documentary hypothesis. He's correcting a lot of issues that the classical documentary hypothesis didn't quite get right. They just kept on ad hoc. So much stuff that it made it become almost silly. So the supplementary hypothesis is trying to make sense of it. And I'm trying not to confuse people because they really need to watch it to understand what he does. But that'll be tomorrow. We're recording that one. We're not going live. And that will be on the Patreon. So if you guys are able to join Myth Vision's Patreon, please do. You can join for as little as $3 a month. They have a year option now you can join, and you'll access hundreds of videos early that are on there that I slowly leak. But as I slowly leak, guys, I'm still driving to Dr. Price's house. I'm still driving to go see Ian Mills. I'm still interviewing tons of people. So I'm never running out of material. There's just always an influx coming into Patreon. So if you join, you're going to have access to all of that stuff. And you can private message me. You can even harass me. I've got guys who harass me, okay? I still love them. So there's my little shameless plug. Thank you so much. Let's do this again. And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, if you have cognitive dissonance, we are Myth Vision.